A people constantly in search of peace and the pacts that honor peace. These are the Kalinga, a people who, even in our most enlightened history books, are often described as aggressive and warlike. And yet, the most significant ritual of their social lives revolves around the search for peace and the prestige accorded to the keepers of the peace. The pact for peace, the budong. Within the context of this ritual, all Kalinga art and music are imbued with meaning and substance, and the melodies and chants come alive with stories of epic heroes and their exploits. Stories of valor and bravery that only underlie a people's quest for peace. In this culture, every artifact finds its meaning in the complex rituals of society. Fabrics are displayed in villages to welcome visitors, are used in the dance, are given ritual meaning, once again in the quest for peace. For the Kalinga, peace is the ideal, and the rituals of the budong only showcase this longing for peace. All culture, all harmony, all meaning stems from this ideal, elusive peace. Peace. In the world we live in, peace is a delicate and tenuous state, a balance, if you will, that we are constantly trying to achieve. We may learn much from the people whom we call the Kalingas, whose lives are constantly threatened by tribal war. And yet, within their society, they have strived nobly for this peace, through negotiations and ritual, through song and dance, through music and the visual arts. For all these attend the budong, the Kalinga Peace Pact. And yet, in this ritualized pact for peace, honor is maintained, prestige is guaranteed, and the continuation of heritage and tradition ensured. It is a skill we all would do well to learn. I'm Susan Calo Medina. Join me as we journey through the villages of Kalinga as we make a pact for peace among the Kalingas. The Kalinga are one of the 7 major ethno-linguistic groups in the Gran Cordillera mountain range of Luzon. Strangely, the very name Kalinga has no ethnographic or geographic basis. Rather, it is a name that was given by the neighboring Ibanag and Gadang, upon whom the early Kalinga would often conduct raids and headhunting expeditions. Thus, the very name by which the Kalinga have come to call themselves means enemy and fighter, thus strengthening the impression that the people are aggressive and warlike.
Historically, the Kalingas are the second wave of Indonesians which migrated to northern Luzon and found themselves settling in what is today now the territorial jurisdiction of the province of Kalinga. The term Kalinga actually has also its origin among our people, which is also an equivalent to what the Tagalog call Kalinga, which means caring, and this is also a term derived from what the people of Cagayan, the Itawis, call the Kalinga, which means headhunters, and because we were told that there were some group of Kalingas which have been conducting expedition of headhunting against the people of Cagayan.
The Kalinga are believed to have arrived in migration from eastern or southeastern Asia, along with the other peoples of the Cordillera. Scholars trace their origins to the famed Dongson culture of ancient Vietnam, upon whom the Kalinga and their Cordilleran neighbors drew their wet rice culture, their ancestor worship, and their strict social mores. The territory the Kalinga occupy is the southern half of what was once the Kalinga-Apayao province. The area is bounded on the east by the Cagayan Valley, to the west by Abra, and to the south by the Mountain Province. The land is full of rolling hills and rugged mountains, often dominated by pasture land or pine forests. The great Chico River cuts through the pastures and gorges, beginning from Mount Data and then emptying into the Cagayan River. The Kalinga were often regarded by the earliest ethnographers as the most warlike of the Cordillera groups. The numerous headhunting raids, the internecine tribal wars, the strict code of honor and tribal justice that seemed to condone bloodshed, all combined to give the historians the image of a people inclined to war and savagery. And indeed, it may be said that Kalinga society placed a high premium on the warrior's ability to fight and, more importantly, to retaliate in cases of offense. However, historic evidence also paints a picture of a people more than willing to defend their lands against the colonizers, which the Kalinga did, and with much success and blood against Spain. Today, much of the old value systems remain very much intact, a feat when one considers just how much of the neighboring cultures, like the Ifugao and the Bontoc, have been seemingly ravaged by modernization. Perhaps it is due to the ruggedness of the land in which they live and their relative inaccessibility. But the Kalinga remain one of the most dramatically preserved of the Cordillera cultures. It is not so much a preservation rooted in material culture, as it is rooted in values, rituals, and systems which have remained in place despite modernization.
Another problem of the modern Kalinga is perhaps his difficulty of keeping pace with development because of our physical inaccessibility or isolation. Most of the barangays, there are many things that they could grow, but which product we could not find to the market.
While modernization makes its presence slowly felt, the traditions of the people of the Ili, the villages, still remains ever present, serving as a source of balance, as a ritual to point the way to peace. In no other ritual is this more evident than in the Budong, or peace pact, that travel time had come to document. Tabuk looks just like any other boomtown in the provinces, but it is the starting point from which one discovers the Ilis and the villages beyond. Our destination was Bangad, a sitio in Tinglayan. This small ili or village was to be the site of the peace pact ritual between the people of Bangad and those of a distant village, Lubo. Some 5 years ago, the Budong, the peace pact between these two villages, had been broken. Since then, men from both villages had been involved in occasional fights. Finally, many months ago, the two villages had started to negotiate a peace pact, a Budong. And now, the two villages had agreed to put an end to the vengeance. and this event was its culmination.
Budong is the mechanism between two villages or the ili that defines the relationship between these two ilis, socially, politically, trade, and even economics and agriculture. It probably started when these autonomous villages started trading with each other, and when they found out that the relationship should not be maintained only as trading partners, they elevated the process to include protection of property and protection of life. So they had to come up with a set of laws and bylaws which, when violated, would ensure the other village that justice should be sought. So that as much as possible, when an infraction is made, the budong holder or the pangat, who is the representative of the village to another, sees to it that the two villages maintain their cordial relations. The pangats actually are the elders of the community, but the pangat may not necessarily be a budong holder. But when you are a budong holder, you are already considered a pangat. Now, the pangat is actually a set of men, wise men who have such experiences, who are consulted upon by the village. The budong holder is the pangat, may not necessarily be old, but you have these qualities of you are respected by by the village. You are economically and financially in the position to hold these rituals that are also expensive. And of course, you are in a position that your kabudong or your partners in the budong would be coming to your house every now and then. The keeping of the peace is only a component of the budong, because the budong actually is the whole life components of the Kalingas. It sets the laws by which a Kalinga should behave. In the Kalinga society, one is responsible for the other. The community life is so closely woven that one infraction or one success of one member of the village is considered infraction or success of the whole ili. So that there is no such thing as individual responsibility. The Kalinga justice system would be best described as similar to the Code of Hammurabi, where blood is exacted for blood or a tooth is exacted for a tooth. But of course, in these instances, the perpetrator is really known. So they do not seek justice to just anybody. I mean, justice is such that when both aggrieved parties, they have this feeling that justice has been served to them. The whole gamut of Kalinga life is anchored on three moral values. We have what you call the ngilin, then we have the biin, and we have the paniyaw. Now, the ngilin is a set of unwritten laws that sort of limits or defines the relationships between people. And the biin is the foundation of morality, and then the paniyaw defines the relationship between Kalinga humans and their spirits. I think the budong as envisioned by the ancestors, even if the situation of the modern-day Kalinga is different, I personally think it should be preserved. The laws, the traditional guidelines of morality, especially, I think every Kalinga now should have its anchors on this.
The village of Bangad in Tinglayan may strike the visitor as far from traditional. Gone are the traditional Kalinga homes of wood and thatch that exist in other, more distant villages. In earlier times, the village would have looked like this. One-room huts clustered closely together around the rice fields and agricultural lands. In a clearing outside the village, the pangat holders of Lubo and Bangad gather for the first stage of the Budong ritual, the amamong. In this formalized exchange of words, the peace pact holders eloquently, sometimes over-emphatically, state their cases for peace. This takes place at the beginning of the negotiations, many months before the final ritual.
The Budong usually started when two villages have they had an infraction on the existing pagta or the laws and bylaws by which their relationship should be defined. So this starts with when the Budong between two villages is broken, maybe by sort of hurting property or person. After some time, the neutral village leaders would talk to the two villages. So a series of negotiations would be undertaken by a group of elders from the other villages. They are called the sakosak.
Tekiwani Kongres pinirmahan to Kalinga, idauan na nanging nga to, apo na Kalinga. Adita ubulog talita lu Kongres.
When the feuding villages would agree to come up now with a new pact, the neutral villages would visit one of the villages and come up with what we call the surdip, which is the acceptance of the, well, in modern times it would be called a ceasefire.
Okay.
So as a symbol, there is an exchange of the war tools, which is the spear and the bolo, or sometimes an exchange of even beads are used.
The next step is the alasiu, in which the budong holders come together to exchange the weapons of war.
Tambay ko mamangwa-mangwa. Tanilan jwa daw bansikap na opyan na dintog. Ad siya piyo na umtupot sa kayang nanay.
Here, Domenica Gunawa Santos of Lubo and Anselmo Lopic of Bangad exchanged the spear and the bolo that symbolized the war between Lubo and Bangad. After many months of negotiations, the Budong ritual begins in earnest, when the delegation of people from Lubo are formally welcomed into Bangad. For the rest of the Budong, they will be housed and fed by the people of Bangad. Thus, a new aspect in the Kalinga character is revealed. In seeming balance to their aggressiveness, we now see their hospitality, their ability to care for their neighbors in an attempt to forget old grudges. Then, the people of Bangad constructed the space in which the negotiations and the dances would be conducted. The Budong is not just a ritual for the Pangats, the elders, and the tribal leaders. It is, first and foremost, a festival of the people. And so the evening is spent in an exchange of songs and dances between the people of the two villages. In this exchange, both young and old dance and play the gangsa. The rhythmic swaying of the dance and the hypnotic, almost singular swaying of the Bangad people is matched by the dancers from Lubo. There was almost no sleep in Bangad that first night of the culmination of the Budong. Early the next morning, the slaughter of a water buffalo marked the beginning of the second day of the Budong. The feast that the people of Bangad would give the people of Lubo was made picturesque by the ritual offering of rice, food, and money. The makeshift tent, which in earlier times would have been made of traditional Kalinga hand-woven blankets, housed the offerings. The women folk of Bangad, dressed in their gala attire, formed long lines and held up their offerings and contributions from their own households. Those who could afford to added pennants made of carefully folded bills. The food was then carefully apportioned, and 3 rows were then laid out by the Bangad people for their Lubo guests. The kabkab potion, a brew of cane vinegar and charred wood, is passed around and anointed on the stomachs of the guests to prevent stomach ache and indigestion.
Multiply no paduom tapno bendisyon na mamin dalar kuana.
The next day, the elders held the pagta, in which the rules of the peace pact were formalized. And then to mark the end of the budong, the linay is conducted. In the linay, the people of Bangad distribute tokens and gifts to their guests and to all those who witnessed the peace pact. In a few months, tradition dictates that the people of Lubo would have to hold a similar feast for the people of Bangad. In this gesture of reciprocity, the two villages would finally have completed their budong. While song and dance are important features of Kalinga culture, the ulalim, or epic chanting, is the recitation by which the Kalinga learn about their epic heroes, the fierce warrior Bana and his lady love Lagunawa, as well as the values of bravery that have distinguished the warriors of Kalinga.
Kasing jay salakit ame mamban adongoy iwe susundate amo di mampay edinu manaka di mang kokopi yamban akalage guna awate kaisa ne agi aga wakanana
Sidong nilain sinaidongan
mangwakad ka neng nusuban na umoy kanodumon nakalaguna awe amo desindin ninung kumataboba iye mamdi kakana nipun kanuta umaye dinu nate boroi dalaguna wate boroi yetin numbag kata umane guni ingagi ingateban natega awan ni mandaw wano se umasa sikibu wadi upong ilag gunaw wi mana ililin awakadi kwa nategi wakan kanok
Sarwi itutua amaali sarwi ome 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 om pipi om.
The Kalinga have always been known as the peacocks of the north, a brand that recognizes the extraordinary ability of the traditional Kalinga to combine feathers, beads, tattoos, and fabrics in a rich texture display of physical beauty. Their Malay stock makes them taller and more statuesque than their Cordilleran neighbors, with just the right physiques for tribal finery. Traditional Kalinga weaving is stark and simple, characterized by the attention to minute detail in the alternating bands of color.
Silamat, silang bitungon, ilaglis, kilae, silapyay, hagitya. Sinuyok kan ilak, malalaga, ilakot ko okpo. O, siye maltak biyak met amin. Olun tago amin masipote pa daw. Sugan ekiw. Kipien bu amin niya kilid. Oh, bu amin masike, bu amin kawati, la ya lus kung kamin tiya amok.
The backstrap loom has produced many fine specimens of Kalinga weaving. Together, these create ensembles of traditional costume. For the women, the traditional costume is made up of the tapis or wraparound skirt. Minus the recently added tops, the tapis is worn only with the rich assemblages of beads that have come to symbolize Kalinga wealth. These ornaments are made up of Venetian glass beads, like this astonishing headpiece of chevron beads. Then there is the bandolier that runs across from one shoulder to the waist, as well as the chokers made up of agates, carnelians, and glass beads. The silver pinagpanga earrings are manufactured by the neighboring Bontoc and are traded into the area. Traditionally, the Kalinga woman wore earrings cut from polished shells. The Kalinga male wears the G-string, often in blue or bright orange. Again, the simplicity of the garment is enriched by bead chokers. The traditional Kalinga attire also included a cape and a headdress of carefully cut and assembled feathers, which would crown the wearer, and the ogkong, a beaded cap sometimes associated with the neighboring Gadang people. Both males and females draw prestige and beauty from their tattoos. In traditional society, tattoos were associated with headhunters and warriors, and only their closest female kin could wear them. This fine example of tattooing belongs to a Kalinga matron. But the physical beauty of the people is complemented by their astonishing grace a grace that is best captured in the banga dance, a woman's show of grace and strength.
Despite what is perceived that the Kalingas are warlike and are troublemakers, we would like to invite you to come and see for yourself what actually the Kalingas are. See our beautiful place and see our people who are hospitable and like the other Filipinos throughout the land are also lovable and free and industrious. So hope you could come over to see our place. Ubali ayu tilanyo kadto way siru din niron na Kalinga.
It seems truly unfair that history should judge the Kalinga as warlike and aggressive without taking into consideration this institution, which is the basis of so much order, so much art, so much creativity. And yet, this seemingly naive search for peace is something we can all learn from. Lagi nating hinahanap at minimithi ang kapayapaan, ngunit nananatiling ganoon lang, isang mithiin. Marahil ay nawala na sa atin ang kakayahang humarap sa ating mga kaaway upang pag-usapan ang mga kondisyon ng kapayapaan. At sa ating pag-uusap, tilang lalong nagkakaroon ng lalim at saysay ang mithiin natin. Sa budong, ang buong lipunan ay nagiging bahagi ng ritual at ang ritual ay nagbubunga ng kapayapaan. Would that we of this aggressive warlike world learn to come to terms with the price of peace, just as the Kalinga do in their budong. In their rituals, we see a people who constantly live with war, making an effort to achieve peace. The ritual has its symbols and its characters, all who embody the ideal. And though the peace process may fail at times, the ritual is there to guide them always in the search. For the Kalinga, the budong is precisely that, a time-honored method that just may one day achieve a lasting peace. I can only wonder what time-honored traditions do we of the city rely on as we dream of peace. I'm Susan Calo Medina. Huwag maging dayuhan sa sariling bayan.